I'm Tracy Matthews with the Campbell County Chamber of Commerce. This morning I'm here with Darin Edmonds, who's running for Gillette City Council, Ward 1. Good morning, Darin.
Morning, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm pretty close to a Gillette native. I've spent 41 years of my life here, not all at one chunk. I left for college an early part of a career and then came back about 15 years ago. This is a community where I grew up in. I've chosen to finish raising my family here and plan to retire here. So I am invested in this community.
Awesome, thank you. So Darin, can you talk to me about the different funding mechanisms for this position?
Yeah, the city predominantly is sales tax revenue driven. That's the bulk of their revenue. They smartly, augment that with a lot of grants, state, local, federal, which is really smart. I mean, it ends up being free money, and if elected, I would like to continue to leverage that for this community. Sales tax, obviously, being the predominant source of revenue for this city of Gillette. That's also something you have to focus on is, the stability of those revenues.
Awesome. So Darin, what do you think will be the most challenging issue you will face during your term?
I think coming up, you hear a lot about it already, is the changing energy economy and that climate, that is coming from the federal level. What is that going to do to this community? What are those impacts going to be? And I think that is going to be on everybody's minds. If you're the city, there's a lot of sales tax generated through the energy industry. So that is certainly impactful. And I think all of the entities that rely on tax dollars or production taxes, I think that's going to be at the forefront for, whether it's the next presidential election, the next, till 2040 and on into the future. What does that look like? And I think all of the entities are going to have to wrestle with that issue. I think that, in my opinion, I think that will be the biggest challenge because it's already bubbling up. What does that do? How do we diversify? How do we walk through what the future is going to be? And that's what I'd like to be a part of is that journey from here to there, whatever that needs to look like for our community. For us to be able to provide the level of service that the citizens expect, at the level that they expect it, to continue to grow and thrive. A community is either growing or it's not. And I think the leaders in this community, with some of the things that are going on behind the scenes, whether it's the shooting complex or the things going on out at the Innovation Center, I think there's generally a desire to begin that process and that journey to wherever it leads us. And I think that's the precipice on which we're standing right now, is what is the next 40 or 50 years look like for this community or for the generation, the kids that are in kindergarten, what is it going to look like for them when they graduate from high school? So that's what I want to be a part of, and I think I can contribute to that with my experience. And
thank you. So Darin, in your elected position, how can you help foster positive relationship with other boards and entities?
Well, in my experience at the cemetery district, we are kind of an island unto ourselves. So in the 15 years that I've worked for them, we've had to partner with the city and the county and various other things. I also served on the Campbell County Public Land Board for 3 years, and there's probably no better place to learn what cooperation looks like than to serve on the land board, because you're right in the middle of the two entities that control it, the city and the county. They're very different organizations. Their motivations are different. And so when you're in that middle board position, on the land board, it's compromise and communication 24/7, because you have the city and you have the county and different levels of influence on those, and everybody's got to land on the same page. So it was a great experience for me to learn what cooperation looks like for entities with different motivations, different funding models, and different goals, really, to get something that works for everybody. So I think that provided a lot of experience for me in a position like this, because the city works with all of the entities, whether it's through joint powers, fire, whether it's dispatch, land board and Camplex, and the state and Wyoming Water Development Commission. There's a lot of moving parts to an entity of this nature, and I think the experience I have from the land board and with a cemetery district provides me with a lot of tools to be able to hit the ground running in that regard.
Thank you. What does economic diversification look like for our community to you?
Well, the short answer is all of the above. And what I mean by that when I say that is that there's a lot of ideas and things that are being explored in this community. And with where we're at with federal energy policy, I think you have to look at everything and figure out, well, what is the one thing or two things or a basket of things that is going to walk us into that next generation for what Gillette and Campbell County are going to be. What is there going to be a solution for large volumes of coal that may not be burned in power plants, but may be used as asphalt for paving? I think you explore and you invest in those opportunities. I think the entities in this county and the state really are at a point where that is absolutely critical. Diversifying the economy, when I say yes to all of the above, things like the shooting complex, things like Camplex. Wyoming's two biggest sources of revenue at a state level are energy, production taxes from energy, and tourism. And I'm of the opinion, we have leaned into the energy option for so long, for decades. For me, and I'm going to oversimplify it, for me, I think it's easy to lean into number two, which is tourism. So whatever form that takes on, it's sports tourism. We have an interstate that runs through our city that will take you, is one of the direct routes to Yellowstone. There's a big hub in South Dakota with the Black Hills, Mount Rushmore. Those people traditionally go from there, cross right through our community to the state, at the state level, and go to Yellowstone and Jackson and on to the Oregon coast. I-90 is a great resource. So what that looks like for economic diversification on the energy side or the industrial side, there's rail service here, there's air service, but tourism, these are things that we know that work. We know that, Camplex offered the ability for basketball and soccer tournaments. It's been a home run. It fills hotel rooms, it fills restaurants. When we have a high school rodeo here, it brings 14,000 people in. We know that these things work. And I'm of the opinion, in the short term, certainly the long term, those are the easiest things to lean into, because Wyoming is already geared for that type of industry. The other things, with the carbon research, I think you do that. I think you invest in industrial parks. There are several communities in Wyoming that have successfully begun that venture, Cheyenne and Sheridan, for instance, who've done really great jobs, but it takes time. We can't be a one-trick pony in Campbell County anymore. I think that's what whether it's the federal government, that's the climate that we live in. It just can't be 200 million tons of coal going to power plants. That is obviously changing. And so what it changes into, there's a lot of really fantastic groups, and the city is a stakeholder at that table, and so are the other public entities on figuring out what that's going to look like. And going back to that first question, I think that ties in with what I see being the biggest challenge is, that this community, and I've been around long enough to remember when Senator Enzi was on, I was a little boy, and my father was on the city council, and he would take me to all of these meetings. What this community needs, and what I refer them to as is an Enzi moment. He wasn't alone, but there was a group of leaders at that time that said, this is what we want Gillette to be in 20, 30, 40 years. And they made those decisions to the benefit of this community, and some of those, you don't see till much later on. You make those investments. I'll use the rec center as an example. I remember when it was being built, and they spent $57 million, and people thought, a lot of people thought that's an outrageous sum of money to spend on something we already had, right? But now this community can't imagine itself without it. And so when I say Enzi moments, those are the kinds of things I'm thinking of. They're tough decisions today, but in 10 years, they'd be like, we should have done that 10 years before we did it. And so I think that's where we're at with economic diversification. There's a lot of fantastic opportunities, and all of these things that are being investigated are really exciting. They won't all pan out, but the ones that do, that bubble to the top, I think will be revolutionary for this community. And we'll wish we had done it. That would be my hope, is that we should have done this in the 90s. We should have done this in the early 2000s. And I want to have a seat at the table and be a part of that.
Darin, do you support the optional 1% tax? And if so, would you support an additional 1%?
I wholeheartedly support the 1% tax that has been approved, I think, every 4 years for the last 40 years. It has changed what this community can be, what it has access to, just the level of service that it has provided, and it has been supported every 4 years for, I believe, at least 40 years. From time to time, this community has asked for an extra penny on top of that. I am supportive of those efforts, so long as they're intermittent and maybe not permanent. When there's things we need, years ago, I think the aquatic center, or when the city needed a new water system, this community said, yes, we are willing to fund that with an additional 1%. What I like about that approach is they've always, and I would support similarly, is they always have a sunset. So when they collect the amount, the Wyoming Center at Camplex was done the same way with the capital facilities tax. When the dollars are raised, the tax goes away. Going back to into these other questions, whether it's economic diversification or that investment in our future, I think there is a time and a place where that is appropriate. But the community makes that decision. And I would support those decisions. The community should have a say, maybe the ultimate say, in what it's going to become. So if they say yes, they said yes to a college. They've said yes to things like the Wyoming Center and various things over the years, and the upgrade to the Madison pipeline. If they see that benefit, I think it's incumbent for the leaders of the community to help drive that bus and make the best decisions, to make the best investments with those dollars. And I think if you can demonstrate the return of that investment back to the community, so whether it's the college or the Wyoming Center, those things in my experience, the return on those investments, I think, is an easy argument to make. Like I said earlier, we've come to the point where we can't imagine the community without these things. And they're tough decisions to make on the front end. And then later on, they seem like, well, no-brainers. And that's my wish, is that, yeah, they're tough decisions to make, but down the road, that's when you're going to be thanked for those decisions. So I guess that's my wish. But I am supportive of the 1% sale wholeheartedly. The infrastructure that it provides and just the quality of life. We can't attract things to this town without. Things are going to make their decisions to come to our community based on what the community is and how we keep this community. We want all these things to land in Gillette on economic diversification, but in order for an airplane to land, it's got to have a runway. And I think the things that public entities will focus on, and that should be their focus, is what do these runways look like, and do we need to build some runways? So that, and the 1% is part of that conversation. So, building nice neighborhoods and building codes and ordinances that make the community nice, or the services that you provide by sweeping up the Scorio in the spring, it makes the community look nice. Those are all runways in some regard, in my opinion. And so, if there's a runway for these things to land, I think they'll land. That you've given the opportunity to land, but it takes investment and it takes vision from this community and from the leaders of this community. So,
thank you. Are there any ideas that you have that I didn't ask you about that you would like to talk about?
Well, one of the things that I would like to focus on, in my campaign is, that there's things have gotten a lot more expensive since COVID, and due to the inflation, and legislatively in the last year, and I think it will be a topic again this year, is property taxes, and just kind of helping citizens with those costs that keep going up. And locally, I think utilities is a similar situation, and utilities are unavoidable, but they have steadily increased, and like people feel that pinch with property taxes. I think there's a similar feeling with utility costs increasing, and these are things that we don't have direct control over because the raw materials get expensive, and PVC pipe everything has gotten really expensive. So much so that the expenses are rising faster than the incomes can compensate for. And I think it's one of the things that local governments should be considerate of, and looking at solutions to soft land some of those things, especially for people with fixed incomes. If I'm elected, I would really like to have at the forefront, what options are there is there a way to soften that expense on the ratepayers, with all of those things that are out of their control, or the things that local governments can do. And that goes back to, are there investments to make where we can be out in front of some of those increases, or look to stabilize, or at least stabilize, ideally, hopefully be able to reduce rates. Because like a lot of things, if a dozen eggs goes from $1 to $2, does it ever go back to $1, or does it go back to $1.50? I think the citizens look to their leadership for at least those conversations, and to work through those. So whether it's, utilities comes to mind because it's something that has that, tied to inflation in the world we live in since COVID, and property taxes, it just gets more and more expensive, and I think there will be some pressure there to address that at some point. So, that's one of the things I just want to be out in front of things and not behind things. And my experience at the cemetery district, we plan 50 years out. We never go fiscal year to fiscal year to fiscal year, and I kind of see that in the local entities because that's how their funding works. It's how many dollars did we get this year? That's how many we can spend next year, et cetera, et cetera. Looking out strategically is important to me, and the city does a good job, and they have over the years. But I think that needs to be a focus, not just look at fiscal 25. The year before, set the budget, and then go year to year to year. Work in 5, 10, 50-year increments. There are things that we know have certain lifespans to them. Well, how do we, and I'll use the overpass, if it has a 40-year life expectancy and we're building one now, part of that conversation needs to be, well, what are we doing to address when we have to build that one again in 40 years? Are we going to start dealing with that today, or are we going to wait till 3 years before it collapses on itself to deal with it? In my day job, we look at those things 50 years in advance. Say, if we build a building today, how are we going to pay for the next one? And so those are things that I would like to bring to the table if I'm elected, is just that presence of mind to look deep into the future sometimes and say, we need to have a plan for this asset or this asset. So, we're not blindsided when an emergency comes or the funding has changed, and going from funding cycle 1 year at a time and having to react in short windows rather than reacting in longer periods of time. So.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Darin, for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Don't forget to go out and vote August 20th.